It all started when my boss asked me to volunteer for a Saturday workshop, without pay. That's when I realized I wasn't being mentored. I was being used. My name is Serena, and I used to believe in hustle culture. I joined Valor Analytics, a fast-growing financial firm in downtown Chicago 2 years ago. I was 27, ambitious, and eager to prove myself. Back then, I thought unpaid overtime was a badge of honor, and that saying yes to everything would eventually lead to recognition. For a while, it seemed to work. When my direct manager left the company, I naturally stepped up, handling reports, managing client data, mentoring interns. There was no official promotion, no title change, and definitely no raise. But I kept going. I told myself, they see my effort, it'll pay off. Then came Rachel. She was hired as the new team lead. Sharp suit, confident walk, and a voice that oozed authority. During her first week, she called me into her glass-walled office and said, "Serena, I've heard great things. I want to fast-track you, but that means going above and beyond. Think of it as investment. Your growth is the return." It sounded inspiring at first. Overnight, my workload doubled. I was no longer just doing analytics. I was suddenly creating slide decks for sales, reviewing legal contracts, even coordinating with HR. Tasks that had nothing to do with my role were now on my plate, always framed as learning opportunities. I started staying late, skipping lunches, and answering emails on weekends. Still, I stayed silent. I thought this was the path to leadership. But then came the Saturday workshop. Rachel called a team meeting and announced we'd be hosting a leadership growth boot camp on a Saturday, mandatory for all junior analysts. She looked straight at me when she said, "And Serena will help coordinate the event, set up, logistics, lunch orders, everything." When I asked if we'd be compensated, she smiled and said, "Growth doesn't come with overtime, Serena. That's why it's called a gift, not a paycheck." Everyone laughed. I didn't. That was the moment the illusion cracked. I went home that evening, opened my laptop, and pulled up my timesheets. I'd logged over 30 unpaid hours that month alone, and that wasn't including the workshop prep. They weren't grooming me. They were exploiting me, and wrapping it in pretty words like mentorship and development. But if Rachel thought I was going to keep smiling while being used like free labor, she didn't know me at all. Because I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make noise. After that Saturday workshop announcement, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's words. Growth doesn't come with overtime. That line echoed in my head for days. I tried brushing it off. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just how ambitious people climbed the ladder. But something didn't sit right. The way she looked at me, as if I owed her for giving me a chance. As if being overworked without pay was a privilege. The week that followed confirmed my worst suspicion. Monday morning, I got a Slack message from Rachel at 7:02 a.m. "Need you to jump in on the Q2 sales deck. You're great with visuals." Sales? That wasn't my job, but I replied, "Sure, I can squeeze it in." By noon, I was also looped into a separate thread with HR, asked to double-check some onboarding documents for accuracy. I stared at my screen. I was doing the jobs of 3 departments and still being paid as a data analyst. Later that day, I ran into Maya, one of our newest hires. She looked overwhelmed, holding a pile of files. "You okay?" I asked. She laughed nervously. "Rachel wants me to prep a presentation for Friday, but I don't even know what the topic means." I offered to help, and that's when it clicked. This wasn't mentorship. This was delegation disguised as guidance. Rachel was offloading responsibilities onto people too afraid to say no, and wrapping it in the illusion of professional development. I started keeping a log, every unpaid hour, every request that had nothing to do with my job description. Every time someone was pushed beyond their role. Things escalated on Thursday. Rachel called another team huddle and said, "Valor is rolling out a new cross-functional initiative. Each of you will be supporting a different department, starting this week. Think of it as a growth accelerator." Then she looked at me and added, "Serena will work with marketing. She's already proven she can handle extra responsibility." There it was again, wrapped in flattery, handed like a trophy. I raised my hand. "Will this be factored into our performance reviews or compensation?" The room went silent. Rachel's smile froze. "Serena, leadership is about saying yes before the reward. If that's a problem for you, we can revisit your alignment here." I felt the heat rise in my chest. Did she just threaten me? No one said a word. No one looked at me. After the meeting, I overheard her whispering to another manager. She's starting to ask too many questions, might not be a team player after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't just being exploited. I was being gaslit. Questioning unpaid labor made me difficult. Wanting fair compensation made me entitled. But I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't gonna let this slide. I opened my laptop, pulled up the employee handbook, and started highlighting every policy they were breaking. Overtime laws, role expectations, fair labor standards. Rachel wanted to play games? She had no idea I was done playing nice. The next morning, I walked into the office with a pit in my stomach. I had printed out a few pages from the company's employee handbook, specifically the section that talked about job responsibilities, fair compensation, and voluntary overtime. I wasn't planning on starting a war, but I also wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine. So when Rachel brought up the Saturday workshop again in our team meeting and said, "Attendance is mandatory, of course," I spoke up. "Actually," I said calmly, "according to the handbook, mandatory weekend work qualifies as overtime. Are we logging this as paid time?" The room froze. For a moment, all you could hear was the faint humming of the AC. Rachel looked at me like I'd just interrupted a sermon. "Serena," she said, lips curling into a tight smile, "if you don't want to be here, that's fine. No one's forcing you. But those who want to grow don't nickel and dime the company." I didn't respond. Not immediately. Because if I did, I might have said something I couldn't take back. Later that day, I got an email from Rachel. Subject: alignment discussion, 15 minutes. Body: let's chat about your attitude during today's meeting. The meeting wasn't really a conversation, it was a lecture. Rachel sat across from me in her office, arms folded, fake sympathy dripping from every word. "You're clearly overwhelmed, Serena," she said. "You used to be so driven, but lately there's been a shift. The team is noticing." I clenched my jaw. "The team, or just you?" She ignored that. "Look, I know pressure can get to people. Maybe you need some time to realign. Step back from the bigger projects for now. Rebuild trust." Rebuild trust? I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "So because I asked about labor law, I'm being sidelined?" Her smile vanished. "That's not what this is. But if you're unwilling to collaborate or adapt to company culture, we'll have to evaluate your fit here." I left that meeting shaking. By Monday, I had been removed from the marketing initiative. Then came the calendar changes. I was uninvited from strategy meetings I'd led for months. My access to certain databases was suddenly under review. When I asked about it, IT said the request came from upper management. And just like that, I became invisible. People stopped asking me for input. My Slack messages were left unread. Even Maya, the new hire I'd helped before, avoided eye contact. I didn't blame her. Everyone saw what happened when you questioned the system. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I should have just played along. After all, Rachel was smart, strategic. She never said anything directly threatening. It was all framed as concern. Coaching. Culture. But then something happened that erased any remaining doubt. That Wednesday, during a company-wide Zoom town hall, our COO praised Rachel's efforts to instill leadership values and encourage a proactive mindset among junior staff. I felt sick. And then Rachel spoke. She smiled at the camera and said, "One of the things I'm most proud of is our culture of accountability. We've had tough conversations recently, especially with team members who may not align yet, but I believe every obstacle is a growth moment." That was it, a public call-out, disguised as vague corporate fluff, and it worked. The next day, someone in the office kitchen asked, "Hey, what's going on between you and Rachel? She seems kinda disappointed in you." That was the final straw. I wasn't just being punished, I was being rebranded, rewritten, turned into a problem employee in the eyes of everyone else, all because I'd refused to be exploited. So I made a decision. I went home that night and opened a secret folder on my desktop, one I'd been quietly building for weeks. Screenshots of Slack requests, emails with impossible deadlines, meeting notes where I was assigned out-of-scope work without compensation. HR had never responded to my original message, so I started documenting everything on my own. But this time, I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was preparing a story, one that needed to be told. And I knew exactly where to start. After the town hall humiliation and the whispers that followed, I knew one thing for sure. Rachel thought she'd won. She thought I'd been put in my place, that I'd learned my lesson, that I'd retreat quietly, maybe even quit, just another ungrateful millennial who couldn't handle tough love. So I did exactly what she expected. I showed up on time, I kept my camera on, I smiled in meetings, I nodded when she spoke, I even said, "Thank you for the feedback," when she told me I still had room to grow. But inside, I was burning. What Rachel didn't realize was that every passive-aggressive comment, every fake smile, every email copied to HR without context, was fuel. And I was storing it all. In silence. I had built a private timeline on Notion. It documented every voluntary task that wasn't optional, every unpaid hour, every role outside my scope. I color-coded it, labeled screenshots, even included timestamps from Slack. It wasn't just a list anymore, it was a case. I tried reaching out to HR again. This time, I phrased everything professionally, attached my documentation, and politely asked for clarification on the company's position regarding unpaid labor and retaliatory management behavior. No response. 1 week passed, then 2. In that time, Rachel relaxed. She started assigning me menial tasks again, booking rooms, organizing lunch orders, just to help the team. I said yes to everything. I played the part of the humbled employee. And that's when I wrote the article. I didn't post it on LinkedIn. That would have been too obvious, too traceable. Instead, I submitted it anonymously to a popular workplace culture blog known for whistleblower stories. The title: When Training Opportunities Are Just a Mask for Free Labor. I laid everything out. My job title versus what I was being asked to do. The lack of overtime pay. The manipulative language used to shame us into compliance. The retaliation when I spoke up. How silence was rewarded and questions were punished. I changed names and company identifiers, but anyone inside Valor Analytics would recognize the story instantly. The piece went live on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, it had over 30,000 views. Inside our office Slack, people were buzzing. No one said anything directly, but I saw it in the side glances, the vague messages in team chats. Did you guys see that post? Sounds familiar. Wild timing. Rachel didn't mention it. Not yet. She was too smart for that. Too careful. But I saw the flicker of tension behind her eyes during our weekly check-in. The slight pause before she spoke. The way she asked, "Everything going okay with you?" Like she was trying to sniff out guilt. I smiled and said, "Couldn't be better." Because the truth was, I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't named names. I hadn't broken any rules. I'd simply told the truth. And the world was listening. This wasn't the end of the story. Not even close, but it was the first crack in the wall. The first domino. Rachel thought she'd buried me. She had no idea I'd been planting seeds the whole time. And soon, they were going to grow into something she couldn't control. By Monday morning, the article had crossed 100,000 views. It had been shared on LinkedIn by former employees of Valor Analytics, reposted in Reddit threads for overworked analysts, and quoted by workplace advocacy groups on Twitter. Some users even guessed the company name in the comments. Correctly. The anonymity was crumbling. And so was the illusion. At first, Rachel pretended nothing was happening. She carried on with business as usual, hosting morning stand-ups with her signature confidence, tossing around words like agility, growth, and resilience, like nothing was burning beneath her feet. But behind the scenes, panic had begun to set in. I noticed it in the tone of company-wide emails. HR sent out a message that read, "We are aware of external media content that may reflect negatively on our industry and want to reaffirm our commitment to ethical labor practices." No mention of the article directly. But everyone knew what it meant. And then something shifted. People started talking. Not loudly, not all at once. But in the subtle, hushed way survivors communicate. A colleague from finance messaged me on Slack. "Hey, was that article you?" I replied with a smiley face. No confirmation. No denial. She responded, "Thank you, seriously." That was the beginning. By Wednesday, a dozen anonymous testimonials had appeared in the blog's comment section. All echoed the same story: unpaid hours, mandatory volunteer events, public shaming disguised as coaching. Rachel's name began to pop up, in vague terms at first, then more directly. Then came the tipping point. Someone, no one knows who, leaked a screenshot from one of Rachel's internal emails. In it, she told another manager, "Serena's resistance is contagious. We need to isolate it before others start questioning expectations." That leak spread like wildfire. And suddenly, this wasn't just about overwork. It was about targeted retaliation. Rachel still didn't address it directly. But the next day, she held an emergency culture reset meeting. She stood at the front of the room, confidently composed, and said, "I know there's been a lot of noise this week, and I want to remind everyone, we rise by lifting each other. If you're struggling, my door is open, but we don't solve problems by pointing fingers. We solve them by stepping up." It was the most polished threat I'd ever heard, and it backfired. Because after the meeting, 3 people from my department resigned. Not quietly either. They posted thoughtful exit messages on LinkedIn citing misalignment with internal values, and praising the article for inspiring them to prioritize their well-being. The following week, an independent journalist published a follow-up story. This time, the company's name was front and center. They had connected the dots through Glassdoor reviews, LinkedIn patterns, and interviews with former employees. Rachel's reputation began unraveling outside our walls. Her once inspirational LinkedIn page, filled with quotes about mentorship and growth, was now flooded with critical comments. Someone dug up a podcast episode where she talked about using stretch opportunities to test loyalty. It went viral, for all the wrong reasons. Then came the internal investigation. Upper management, under mounting pressure, announced that they would be hiring an external auditing firm to assess labor practices and managerial culture. That same day, Rachel canceled all her meetings. Her office door remained shut. No one saw her leave. By Friday, her name was gone from our org chart. No announcement, no farewell email. Just gone. But the fallout didn't stop with her. The company issued a public apology on its website stating that certain managerial approaches did not align with our core values and promising systemic changes. Internally, they began restructuring. A new policy mandated compensation for all off-hours work. A whistleblower platform was launched, anonymous, encrypted. Several other managers known to enable Rachel's tactics were quietly moved or removed. And me? I didn't say a word, not publicly, not yet. But something had changed. People stopped avoiding me. Some even thanked me in passing, their eyes holding something I hadn't seen in weeks: respect. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note on my desk. It read, "Because you stood up, I finally could too, Maya." I stared at the note for a long time. This wasn't just revenge, it was release. I didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. I just needed to be the first. Rachel thought she could isolate me, but what she didn't realize is that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound before the storm, and this storm had only just begun. Rachel's disappearance from the org chart felt anticlimactic. No final meeting, no all-staff announcement, just a blank line where her name used to be. But the silence spoke volumes. By the following Monday, the HR team issued a carefully worded email. Effective immediately, Rachel Williamson is no longer with Valor Analytics. We wish her well in her future endeavors. It was the corporate version of slamming the door shut. But outside the company, the fallout was just getting started. The journalist who had published the expose released a follow-up titled, "Toxic Leadership in the Age of LinkedIn Coaching Culture." The piece dissected Rachel's rise in the industry. Her speaking engagements, her viral posts about servant leadership, her podcast interviews filled with polished soundbites like, "Empowerment begins with sacrifice." That line was ripped apart on social media. People began sharing their own experiences under managers like her. People who used the language of growth to justify burnout, who masked exploitation as mentorship. One by one, conferences quietly dropped Rachel from upcoming panels. Her once busy LinkedIn page went dark. No new posts, no engagement. And then came the final blow. A mid-sized competitor of Valor released a public statement, not naming names, but clearly referencing our situation. They emphasized their commitment to fair labor practices and zero tolerance for retaliatory management. Within days, they saw a spike in qualified job applicants. Rachel's name had become radioactive. I later learned through a friend in recruitment that she'd applied for a director role at another firm and was rejected after the hiring manager Googled her once. And Valor? The company scrambled to salvage its image. New workshops were launched, this time optional and paid. Department heads were rotated. External consultants were brought in to rebuild trust. But trust isn't rebuilt through policy alone. It takes people. And for the first time in months, people started coming to me. Quietly, cautiously, they'd ask, "How did you do it? Weren't you scared? What made you speak up when no one else did?" I never claimed credit. I never confirmed the article was mine. I just said what I knew to be true. Sometimes you don't need to be brave, you just need to be done. The best part? I wasn't even the one who took her down. Rachel buried herself. One email, one meeting, one silencing tactic at a time. I simply gave the truth a place to land. And once it landed, it echoed. The irony? A month before all this, Rachel had told me leadership is about legacy. Well, she got hers. A cautionary tale in every HR seminar, a case study in every management course, a name whispered as a warning, don't be a Rachel. As for me, I stayed, at least for a little while. Not because I forgave the company, but because I wanted to rebuild something better. The new leadership actually listened. They asked for input. And when I asked to create a task force on ethical leadership, they said yes. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just tired of pretending silence was safe. Rachel had used that silence to control, to isolate, to dominate. And in the end, it destroyed her. Because silence doesn't protect leaders. It exposes them. 3 months later, I stood on a stage under warm lights, staring out at a room full of executives, HR leaders, and young professionals. The event was called Ethics in the Modern Workplace. I had been invited by the organizers after they read the viral article and asked if the anonymous author might be willing to speak, confidentially, of course. I hesitated. For weeks. But then I thought about Maya's note, about the dozens of messages I had received, about the ones who still couldn't speak up. And I said yes. I wore a simple black blazer, hair tied back, heart pounding. The moderator introduced me vaguely as a data analyst who played a key role in sparking one of the most talked about conversations in corporate America this year. I walked to the mic, the crowd leaned in, and I said, 3 months ago I was anonymous, today I'm not. My name is Serena, and I was the author of When Training Opportunities Are Just a Mask for Free Labor. Gasps. Audible. Real. I took a breath and continued. I didn't write that article to destroy anyone. I wrote it because silence was costing us more than truth ever could. Because somewhere along the way, we let ambition become exploitation, and called it mentorship. I told them everything. The workshops, the unpaid hours, the retaliation, the fake smiles, the slow erasure of dignity disguised as culture fit. I didn't name Rachel. I didn't need to. Her story was already public. But I talked about what came after. The healing, the policy changes, the people who found their voice. And then I said, leadership isn't about power. It's about accountability. And if your leadership only works when no one's allowed to question it, then it was never leadership to begin with. The room stood up. Applause echoed for what felt like minutes. But the real moment came after. A woman approached me in the hallway, eyes glassy. She whispered, "Thank you. I've been scared to speak up for months. Now I'm not." That was the real ending. Not Rachel's firing, not the article going viral, not even the applause. It was the ripple. The proof that one voice could crack a system and help others find their own. People always ask if I regret it, if it was worth it. My answer is simple. Sometimes the loudest change comes from the quietest person in the room. And I wasn't quiet anymore.